Hey y'all, so today I'm going to be doing a spoiler-free review of the Shades of Magic trilogy by V.E. Schwab. Lately, I haven't really been doing many reviews or wrap-ups except the one that I did at the end of January, but I read this entire trilogy recently and I had some pretty interesting opinions on it, so I wanted to go ahead and make a video talking about it. As with all my reviews, this is going to be spoiler-free. However, I am going to talk about how predictable or unpredictable I found the series, so if that's something that you consider kind of spoilery, I can tell you what part that I'll talk about that in and tell you when to skip ahead. But overall, I will not be talking about any spoilers for things that happen in here, so don't worry about getting spoiled. This first book, A Darker Shade of Magic, centers around our main character, Kel, who is an Antari, which means that he can do a very special kind of magic, and he can also travel between different worlds. More specifically, he travels between multiple different Londons, and in this universe, there are 4 of them, which he distinguishes based on color. Kel calls his London Red London, and it is full of magic. There's also Grey London, which is basically our London, just a couple hundred years in the past. There's also White London, which is magical in some form, but a lot of the magic has been devoured and it's not a very good place. And then there's Black London, which is basically the lost London. No one can travel there because it's been sealed off because magic basically completely devoured itself and destroyed it. There are very few Antari remaining in any of these worlds, and Kel is actually a messenger for the Red London throne. So he goes back and forth between different Londons, giving messages to the different kings and queens of the White, Red, and Grey London's thrones. However, apart from these messages, anything else is illegal to bring across different Londons. But Kel has a habit of smuggling items from one London to another. Nothing too big, just little trinkets, until one day he smuggles something that he really shouldn't have. And that's kind of the impetus of the story. In addition to Kel, though, we very early on meet our kind of secondary main character named Lila, who is a thief in Grey London, and their paths cross, and she gets entangled into this mess too. And that's kind of where I'm gonna leave it with the premise. And I want to get my general opinion on the series out pretty early in this video, just so y'all are aware where I stand with it. And basically, I liked it, I enjoyed it, but I feel like my enjoyment of it supersedes the quality of the series. And what I mean by this is basically I thought the series was alright. I certainly was not blown away by it in any way, shape, or form, but I did enjoy my time reading it. Basically, I liked it, but it's nowhere near my favorite series that I've ever read, and I definitely am going to be fairly critical of it in discussing each book individually and the series overall. I also find it fairly important to say that I, unlike a lot of people I think on BookTube, have never fallen in love with or been completely engrossed in a book by Victoria Schwab or V.E. Schwab. I've read both this trilogy and Vicious, and I don't know if maybe I just don't click with her as much as some other people on BookTube, but all 4 of those books I have liked but not found particularly impressive. So I gave A Darker Shade of Magic, the first book, 3 stars out of 5. It was a high 3 out of 5, maybe like a 7.5 out of 10. And the second and third books both got 4 out of 5, which I would say is somewhere on the lower end of 4 out of 5, so 8 out of 10. So basically, while the second and third books got 1 star higher than the first book, I have fairly equal opinions on all of them. So while I did listen to all 3 of these on audiobook over the past month or so, I actually read A Darker Shade of Magic a couple years ago, 2.5 years ago, and I originally rated it too high. I rated it 9 out of 10, and then I quickly dropped it down to a low 4 out of 5 because I realized that I just simply overthought my rating and rated it higher than I should have. And then over time, my opinion went down a little bit and I changed it to 3 out of 5, which is where it stayed until this reread. And then I listened to the audiobook and listened to the second and third books as well. So I had read A Darker Shade of Magic before, but the other 2 were new. And my first kind of critical note about the series overall is that after reading the whole thing, it really felt like A Darker Shade of Magic was a prequel to a duology. The second and third books just felt like their own story, separate from A Darker Shade of Magic. Because to me, A Darker Shade of Magic really read as its own individual story. I obviously am not going to get into spoilers as of why that is, but it felt very separate from the second and third books. I also personally felt that A Darker Shade of Magic itself felt very rushed. It's the shortest book in the series, but it also kind of is the most fast-paced and has the most things happen in it. So it really just felt like everything was crammed in way too tightly, and then the second and third books felt a little bit slower in comparison. So just generally, I felt a significant disconnect between the first book and the second and third books. I'm not really sure how to word this next criticism without sounding like kind of a pretentious jerk, but I felt like a lot of the plot of the story was kind of basic. There wasn't really anything that happened throughout the series that I was incredibly impressed by or found to be super unique and different. And obviously, pretty much any book ever is just a rehashing of things that have already happened in other books, but it just felt like everything about the book was something that I'd seen elsewhere, at least plot-wise. I just felt like the way that the story went was something that I was already kind of familiar with and had already kind of seen done. And in that sense, I didn't find it to be super unique, and that's kind of why I considered it to be basic. And obviously not every book needs to have like some super impressive plot twist that's going to like shock you and leave you surprised, but I felt like I kind of was aware of where it was going because I'd already experience things similar to it. However, while I'm fairly critical of the plot of the story, I think that the magic system is actually really interesting. It's one of the strongest aspects of the series for me, because we obviously have Kel, who is able to do a very specific and very unique form of magic, but a lot of the other characters also are able to do magic because in Red London, a lot of people are able to do magic. They obviously can't do the same kind of magic as Kel can, but they're able to use elements, and I feel like that was a very interesting aspect, and it was interesting to see how different characters were able to use their magic differently, and so the magic system was something that I personally found to be pretty intriguing. The place where I kind of have both positives and negatives to say is about the characters, because I found myself invested in the characters, but when I read a series, I typically am, even if I like don't care about them as much as I do about characters in other series, if that makes sense. Basically what I mean is that if I'm gonna read 3 books about some characters, I'm likely going to be invested in them, and while I definitely am not as invested in these characters in this story as I would be in like the Mistborn trilogy, which I love, or something like that, I found myself at least invested in what was happening to them and rooting for them to, you know, not die. That said, I do kind of feel like some of these characters were characters that I've seen done before. And like I said, everything has already been done before. Everything is just a revamp of old ideas, but they just felt not quite like stock characters, but pretty similar. And with Kel, I actually kind of enjoyed that because while he is kind of the stereotypical male lead who will do anything to protect those that he cares about, he was actually pretty likable, and I did enjoy Kel as a character. But where Kel was a likable kind of stock character, Lila was not quite. Lila is very much the girl who's not like other girls, and she likes to tell you that she's not like other girls, and that just, it's not a cool trope, guys. That, don't do this. Look, I understand the sentiment. I'm definitely more the Lila personality than I am the get dressed up and go to formal events personality, but guess what? You don't have to be one or the other, and you don't have to criticize someone else if you are the opposite. Like, it just, stop with the girl hate just because you like to not wear dresses and someone else does like to wear dresses. It's not cool. Like I said, I think that this got better throughout the series, but I feel like out of the characters, she was the one that felt most like a stock character. I felt like some of the other characters were a little bit more unique, but on the whole, I felt like these were characters that I'd seen before, and it'd be one thing if like one of them was and the rest of them were pretty unique, but like they all kind of felt like characters I'd read about before. And when that happens, it kind of feels like lazy writing. And then my last kind of general series critique is that I felt like character motivation wasn't always super clear. And on the one hand, yes, humans are unpredictable and sometimes they just do things for no reason at all without fully thinking things out. But in this case, even characters who thought things out and were very thoughtful with their actions would sometimes just like do things and it wasn't really clear why they were taking this action to resolve this specific problem. And sometimes it would be explained, but it was kind of flimsy. And like I said, it's one thing if that's like a character trait and there's just this one person who just randomly does stuff and you just have to deal with that. And there definitely was one of those characters, but it just was more like widespread across characters, which for me denotes that the logic wasn't always there in the writing. So more book specific, first book is A Darker Shade of Magic. Like I said, I thought that this was probably the most fast-paced book of the series, but it also felt the most rushed. It's 400 pages long, and I feel like it could have used a bit more time to not like hurry through some of the events that I felt like it kind of just like breezed through. It needed to not be as rushed as it was. And like I already said, it just felt like this book was a prequel to the other two books. I mean, obviously it is the first book in a series, but it felt more detached than a first book really should. On the other hand, book 2, A Gathering of Shadows, felt like it was a little bit too stretched out. It definitely suffered a little bit from middle book syndrome to me. On the one hand, I often enjoy the second book in a series because it is a little bit more developmental. You get to develop the characters and the world and the magic system a little bit more, but I felt like the things that I enjoyed in this book were things that weren't quite as relevant to the overall plot of the story, which just seems like filler. Like if I think back on every book in the series and I think about like what happened in each one, like the big major events, this one's probably the one that has the least number of major events because this, like I said, was kind of a bit of filler. Definitely not all of it, but for me the most enjoyable aspects of the series were kind of filler. So I think it would have been maybe a little bit better to have only a duology rather than a trilogy, but I mean, it seems like that's how most trilogies are as of late. And then of course book 3, A Conjuring of Light. This one I think was kind of the most well-balanced pacing wise. I feel like it was a pretty quick pacing, but not too fast. Definitely wasn't as slow as the second book, and I can definitely list a lot more things that happen in this book. I feel like overall the pacing was pretty decent. So since we're on the topic of the third book, I'm gonna talk about the predictability or lack thereof in the series. So if you want to skip this because you think it's a little bit spoilery, I will put a time somewhere on the screen for you to skip to so that you can just skip this portion. So this is kind of another reason why I felt that this series was kind of basic or average, and that's that I found it to be pretty predictable. To be fair, I think that there are many ways that a story overall can be predictable, but I feel like the Shades of Magic trilogy kind of hit on all of those. So to be slightly more specific, but without spoilers, I felt like anytime there was a suspenseful situation or a cliffhanger, it always ended kind of exactly how I expected it to. And I feel like that's partially it just being predictable and partially the series kind of doing the same thing over and over again. Like I can think of situations that happened in the third book that happened similarly in the first book and ended similarly in both. It just felt like not only was it generally predictable, but it almost kind of repeated itself. And then with the actual conclusion of the series, I feel like there are things that series can do to either be satisfying or purposefully unsatisfying, but still in an interesting way. And I feel like the series just took the straight and narrow, obvious path for it to take. And I'm not going to tell you what kind of ending that was, whether it's like a happy ending, a bittersweet ending, whatever it was. I'm not going to obviously tell you what it was. But like, I feel like exactly what I expected to happen happened, both based on general predictability and like what had happened in the series up to that point. It just felt like there were too many specific expectations that were exactly met. Like if you want to have an interesting ending to a series, you want to have some sort of intrigue revolving around how the series is going to end. And I feel like I didn't really have that for most of the last book because I was kind of like, based on the way that it's gone so far, this is exactly what I think is going to happen. I hope that was clear, but like, just generally, I feel like it's a pretty predictable series. And like I said, that's both based on like other series that I've read and what I expect from them, and also things set up from early on in the series. And there's a difference between correctly setting up expectations for readers for later on in the series and just doing the same thing multiple times, which is what I felt like the series did. So that is my opinion overall on the Shades of Magic trilogy. I enjoyed it, I liked it, but I feel like it is a pretty average and standard series overall. If you want something that is along the lines of a fantasy and a little bit of dystopia mixed in, this is nowhere near the best series that I could recommend to you. It's all right. It's average. If you haven't read a ton of fantasy trilogies, maybe you would like this more than me. I've just seen all the tropes done a billion times, and I guess it's just a bunch of things in one place that I've already seen done a lot of times. And like I said, I enjoyed the series, I liked it, but it didn't blow me away because I feel like I've seen a lot of it before. Like I said, its strong suit is the magic system. I feel like the magic system could have been something really, really fantastic if given more intriguing characters and a better plot. But alas. So if V.E. Schwab were to write something else in this world with different characters, I'd be interested in checking that out. But given my history with her books and how I just feel kind of meh about them, I'm actually gonna rethink that statement, because I don't know. I haven't ever disliked any of her books, I've just never been blown away by one. I do still want to read her other duology, the one that starts with This Savage Song. I'm not sure what the overall title of the duology is, but that's definitely one that I'm still interested in. However, I think that if I'm kind of equally meh about those books, I'm probably going to stop attempting to read her books, because while they're okay, I have, like I said, I'm a broken record at this point. I've never been overly impressed by her books. Last note before I wrap this video up, I have often in the past changed my ratings on books, often lowering them, and this is one of those series where if enough time passes, I could definitely see myself lowering the ratings on books 2 and 3 to 3 stars. At this point, I think that the 4-star rating actually fits pretty well because I did enjoy them, and I think that they are solid enough to get that barely 4-star rating. But given how I typically tend to lower ratings after a little while, I really wouldn't be surprised if 6 months from now all 3 of these books were sitting at 3-star ratings, because while I did enjoy them, often over time my enjoyment stops being the thing that I think about when I think about books, and I tend to think more critically about them and remember the more critical aspects more than the enjoyment, which therefore means that I lower the rating. So a lot of rambling to say that I wouldn't be surprised if in 6 months all 3 of these books had 3 stars on my Goodreads. So overall, I like the series, I enjoyed it, but it's never gonna be anywhere near one of my favorite series because I feel like I've been there, done that. So that is it for my review of the Shades of Magic trilogy. Let me know down in the comments what you thought of the trilogy if you've read it. Please don't feel like I'm trying to bash this trilogy. Like I said, I liked it. I just feel like I've read so many better things and I wanted so much more out of this trilogy. As always, I will leave links down in the description to my blog, Twitter, and Goodreads. Please add me as a friend on Goodreads. I would love to be friends with all of you. Like, comment, subscribe, all that jazz. Thank you so much for watching. Bye!